The Stanley Park virtual reality kind of field trip is really a pilot project. It's like a prototype of what can we do in this area of interactive, virtual, immersive learning space.
The Stanley Park virtual reality field trip was developed by UBC faculty, students, and staff, and was supported by VR industry experts. We have developed a project that offers students a virtual field trip experience. We have built a capacity for similar projects in the future and developed best practices for creation of educational modules in VR.
The origin of this project comes from difficulty of people accessing field sites, whether that's through funding or through other logistics. And so we saw this as a possible entry, and we saw this technology maybe being able to fill a gap.
What we're trying to build here is a realistic VR field trip experience. One where you can walk through and not just admire the scenery that you're in, but to be able to interact with different kinds of elements, interact with different parts of the environment, while learning something new about the site.
With the help of units on campus like Emerging Media Lab, you can create learning experiences using these technologies. And if we are going to innovate in these fields of emerging technologies, we definitely need to be able to have that support.
Emerging Media Lab at UBC is experimentation space for faculty, staff, and students to try emerging forms of technology and media and find use cases in education and research. It was a learning process for everyone, so for staff, for students, and faculty.
There really was no guarantee that we would have produced anything of any noteworthiness when all this was said and done, because it is so experimental.
Because we are all learning the technology as we are using it, there could be experimentation and there's permission to fail.
None of us had done this before. We were reinventing the wheel a lot, we were making a lot of mistakes, and hence we ended up partnering up with Metanauts.
To be honest, I didn't expect it to be so fun to work with the students. I don't do the actual programming part of the project, but I do help out to develop some kind of a workflow or a guideline. I
really appreciated that EML brought in experts. The fact that we had that resource available to us was immensely helpful.
Probably 70 to 80% of the work done on the project has either been students creating content or writing code and creating technology.
What really surprised me was their ability to learn very quickly and to resolve most of the problems on their own.
If you needed a menu to pop up, I got the menu to actually pop up. If you needed the thing to play sound, I got it to play sound. If it was relating to programming, I probably had a hand in it.
That's been really exciting to be working and innovating with undergraduate students, being the primary drivers of project development.
The students themselves are leading this project with cutting-edge skills.
This kind of learning is invaluable. We can then turn around and do this again, but much more efficiently and much more quickly.
So that the next people who come along don't have to reinvent the wheel.
UBC's willingness in general to start experimenting with things like VR, I think it's got incredible potential for helping to visualize some of the more abstract elements of science and education in general.
One of the main deliverables of this lab is creating white papers and best practices. We compile everything at the end of each project and create a document, the best practices of doing similar project. And we pass it to other people who want to do it again in the future.
It's definitely been a fantastic experience.
There's history, and then there's geological history. The lower mainland area is peaceful today, but it has experienced many dynamic geological processes over the past hundreds of millions of years. The result closely, do you hear the rushing currents of Burrard Inlet? Or it could be the sound of cars rushing by on the bridge deck. Notice how similar these sounds are? At night, the Lionsgate Bridge lights up like a strand of pearls stretching across from Stanley Park to the North Shore. That shoreline was almost completely undeveloped 100 years ago, when this place became Stanley Park. There was no bridge, and we're now just east of Prospect Point, looking out across Burrard Inlet. This spot is known as Lumberman's Arch. It's named after an arch built in downtown Vancouver to commemorate the 1912 visit of Canada's Governor-General. This massive arch was then moved here for tourists to marvel at, as a document to the lumber industry in BC. Later, when it began to rot, it was replaced by the simpler structure that remains in the field across the road. But this place has another history, one that's not all that easy to look at. The history of Stanley Park is inseparable from Canada's history of the marginalization of its Indigenous people. When Lord Stanley declared this park to be for people of all creeds and customs, a few restrictions applied. He neglected to include the local First Nations communities who already lived there. So today, it's hard to spot the evidence that this was once a thriving village, yet another example of how the Indigenous history from Stanley Park was erased. But if you look closely, the evidence is here. Long before Europeans arrived near Stanley Park, this was the village of Waiwai, home to a thriving Coast Salish community. Midden shells reveal that people lived, hunted game, and harvested shellfish in this area for at least 3,200 years. In the late 1800s, welcome to the Stanley Park virtual field trip. Soon, you will be able to explore an interactive, virtual environment of Prospect Point, a beautiful site at Stanley Park. You will learn about the site shortly, but first, I will help run you through this tutorial room so that you can enjoy the experience to the fullest. There are two ways of moving around. The first way is teleportation. It is the fastest way to travel long distances around the park. To teleport, use your thumb to hold down the big round button located in the middle of your controller. Aim at the ground in front of the next poster in the hallway using the indicator to see where you will teleport to. Let go to teleport. The other way of moving around is to walk with your arms. To walk with your arms, hold down the grip buttons on the sides of both controllers, bring your arms down to your sides, and swing your arms as if you were walking. This info panel is like a big tablet where you can browse through various educational content. Browse through the content of the info panel by pressing down on the right and left buttons with your controller. There will be multiple info panels sprinkled in the park for you to find, each with unique information about the site. Welcome to Prospect Point. This famous viewpoint is one of the popular tourist attractions in Stanley Park, with views of the Lionsgate Bridge and across Burrard Inlet to Vancouver's North Shore. This forest surrounding you is an ancient wilderness. Or is it? The trees you see around you certainly mirror the appearance of forests in pre-industrial times. It's easy to stand in this place and imagine a time before tall buildings, before cement sidewalks, before parks,